Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome to this What It Takes to Get into Research and Innovation. Thank you so much to you all for joining me. Just to give me some reassurance, if you can hear me and see me, could you do some kind of a thumbs up or notification in the chat, and that'll make me reassured that it's all working okay. Great, thank you for those thumbs up, that's perfect. Well, my name's Sarah Main. I am delighted to be a visiting professor at the University of Westminster. I am also the Executive Director of the Campaign for Science and Engineering, an advocacy group that works to represent a range of organisations in the research and innovation space and to give a voice to them in politics and policymaking. So this What It Takes is the first online panel event of 2021 and the fourth in the series for this academic year, organised by the Alumni Relations team in partnership with the Westminster Enterprise Network. You are all very welcome and thank you for joining us. We're going to run this session from now until about 8 p.m. this evening. It's being recorded and a recording will be available on the Alumni YouTube channel soon. And the team will send you that channel and some useful resources in a follow-up after the event. So as you know, your cameras and microphones are off, but the chat is on, and you are very welcome to use the chat to pose questions for our speakers, and we will get to that sort of Q&A session where I'll put some questions to the speakers a bit later on. So yeah, just to say the YouTube won't pick up any of the usernames on the chat, so don't worry, there will be anonymity on the YouTube channel. And we're keeping our fingers crossed that the connections will all work, but do bear with us if there's any problems. So without further ado, we can really get into the main topic of the discussion. What we're going to do tonight is divide up the session into two main parts. One is to hear from our fantastic panelists about how they got into research and innovation. So what their career path was like, what type of career they're in now as a researcher, and what innovation means to them and how that's been part of their work and career. And I am very happy to give you a little bit of a sketch, if you like, of my own career path in research and innovation to add to the panels. And then I'll ask the panelists to turn to any sort of tips and hints, so sharing practical skills and advice on how you might be able to get into research and innovation. And that's where we might get a few useful resources to share with you afterwards. And then the final part of the event will be the Q&A. So do think all the way through the event from now on what sort of questions you might like to ask, and the moderators of the event will put those together and hand them over to me to put to the panelists. So I'll tell you a little bit about myself, and then I'm going to introduce the panelists and ask them to give us a little summary of their research, career path into research and innovation. So for me, I studied sciences. I went to university in the hopes of studying physics, actually, but I ended up doing molecular biology. I switched and I entered into a research career for about 10 years, working in labs in molecular biology, in cancer research and in other forms of cell and molecular biology as a PhD student and then a postdoctoral researcher. And I did a lot of science communication and sort of public engagement along the side of that, and decided that actually I was interested in going down the path of science policy and strategy. And I moved from the lab into one of the large funding agencies for research and innovation, in my case, the Medical Research Council. So I gained some experience there of what it is to be one of the funders, so giving out money from government to researchers. And then from there, I moved into the government itself, into the Department of Business, Innovation and Skills at the time, where they steward, if you like, all of government's money that it invests in research and innovation across all subjects and disciplines. And I helped to put together a representation from that department into the Treasury at one of the spending review rounds back in 2013. After that, I moved from my job there into the Campaign for Science and Engineering, where I am now. And as I mentioned to you, that is an organisation which exists to speak on behalf of research and innovation organisations. We have about 115 members, and they span across from businesses, multinational corporates, to startups and small and medium-sized enterprises, science parks. We have in our membership many universities, including the University of Westminster, about 50 universities from all over the country, and other organisations that use research and innovation. So, for example, charities like Cancer Research UK, and also learned and professional societies like you might have come across, for example, the Royal Society of Biology or the Institute of Physics, that kind of thing. And then public engagement centres like the Glasgow Science Centre. So it's a real mix of organisations that have some activity in the research and innovation space. And I talk to them, listen to them, and put forward ideas to government on how to make the UK have a great environment to do science and engineering and research and innovation in all its forms. And that might cover things like funding, so money from government to scientists and researchers, might cover things on skills like education programs, or how the rules around immigration in order for people to come into the UK from outside to do science jobs, and things like using scientific advice in government decision making. So I think that's enough of a sketch from me, but you're very welcome to ask more questions later if you want to. And now I will turn to our panel, who I think, we can be really thrilled to have these three people joining us, and I think you're going to be really interested in what they have to say, and I certainly am. So I will give a very brief introduction to our panelists, and then I'm going to ask them to just introduce themselves and give a little bit of a summary of how they got into research and innovation careers. So first, we have Penny Clark, co-founder of Conscious Co-Living. Penny is currently completing her PhD at the University of Westminster, measuring and exploring environmental sustainability in shared living communities. Next, we have Natalie Sally, who is an engagement manager for Healthwatch Lambeth. Natalia also manages an award-winning local environmental group, One Child, One Tree, which she founded in 2017 in the Philippines. Natalia studied a postgraduate diploma in health and social care management, graduating in 2009. And Natalia joins us this evening from the Philippines, where she is at the moment. Finally, we have Dr. Lem Ngongola, a research associate at Newcastle University and a founder of Core Africa, a research organisation that aims to increase awareness of the importance of research in Africa. Lem graduated in MSc in International Public Health Nutrition in 2015. So I think you'll agree with me, we've got a really fascinating group of people here and experiences and paths into research and innovation. So I'm going to ask each of our panelists to give a very brief overview of their careers and their journeys from studying at the University of Westminster until now. And if I can turn to you in the order I've just introduced you, that would be really helpful. So could we start with Penny Clark, please? Penny, if you could, there you are. Oh, very welcome, Penny. It's lovely to see you. And I hope, are you feeling relaxed and comfortable, ready to talk to our group here?
I think so. I'm in a hotel room at the moment, so it seems like the Wi-Fi connection is pretty good right now, but I'm hoping it will continue to be uninterrupted.
Well, it sounds fantastic to me, and I should say we've got 84 people on the call, and all looking forward to hearing from you. So please let me hand over to you for a little description of how you got from the University of Westminster to where you are now.
Yeah, absolutely. Really great to be here. So my journey into research was quite long in a way. For my undergraduate degree, which I did back in 2007, graduating in 2010, I did English literature, which is, it's not really research related, but I think I've always had an interest in human beings and in communication. And I came out of university not knowing too much what I wanted to do. I got a marketing job, and I worked in marketing for just under 5 years. All this time I was saving up towards having an adult gap year. But the question always was, okay, I'll have my adult gap year. That's a wonderful privilege to be able to have that. But then what happens when I come back? And I think I spent quite a long time thinking about it and didn't find anything that really inspired me. And I was enjoying marketing okay, but I wasn't super keen on it. I wasn't sure that I wanted to make it a career. And then actually, it just so happened that one day on social media, one of my friends shared a video of their 3-minute thesis entry. And if people haven't heard of that before, there's something called the 3-minute thesis competition, in which people summarize their PhD into a 3-minute talk. And then they go and perform this and they compete for a prize. But the idea is to turn something quite complicated into something short and really compelling. And my friend, who, I didn't even really know very well, we just stayed in touch via social media. She was in a very different discipline to a discipline that I would ever be in. She was looking at cancer research. But I really felt when I saw it, really, I think it was a good talk, but I felt very compelled on a personal level by what she was doing. I felt very compelled by the idea of the PhD. And I think what was really appealing to me was this idea of being at the coalface of something, of finding out something new and contributing something unique, and being able to have a role where you're learning. And the point is that you don't know, but you get to be the person who goes and finds out. And I really love that idea. So after I'd taken some time off from work, I came back and I studied a master's in social research methods. I think always with the idea that I was journeying towards a PhD. And then through some work experience that I undertook with the University of Westminster, I met my PhD supervisor, and then I applied for a PhD and got accepted. So that was really my journey back into research. And then since then, I'm one of the co-founders of a company called Conscious Co-Living. And this is a consultancy and somewhat of a research body and a content producer that looks at helping to embed social and environmental impacts into shared living spaces. So types of living where the idea is people live together as a community. And I co-founded this company about halfway through doing my PhD. And I have to say, I think I kind of fell into it. I met up with some people who were also really passionate about a form of shared living called co-living. We researched it together. We presented at a few workshops. And then eventually we began to think, hey, maybe there's a business here as well. So the business was almost a bit unintentional in a sense. So yes, in a way, it's been quite a funny and meandering path. But here I am, and I'll leave it there.
Thank you so much, Penny. I thought that was really fascinating, and I'm sure prompting a lot of questions. Just one I might put to you just now is that it really strikes me from your story that you have experienced research and what people might think of research, but you've also had like a real connection with the public and with business. You founded a consultancy while you're doing your PhD. So I just wondered if you had any reflections at this stage on that, I don't know, that sort of coexistence, if you like, or the connection between research and innovation, and other, innovation in terms of turning research ideas into practical use.
Yes, so I'm just coming to the end of my PhD now, but I have to say that doing that alongside the business, it often, I think, provided me with a very nice and favourable contrast, because the PhD in particular, it can be quite a slow and long process, and often like fairly isolated for long periods of time, whereas the world of business is more fleet-footed. It's much more about talking to people. But that aside, because I think in a sense, perhaps a PhD is a bit of an anomalous example of research. I think that actual research post the PhD, which is much more collaborative, and it is about publishing faster, it is about networking. I would say that actually those two are much more similar because, you know, at the end of the day, whether you're, I think there's this similarity between being an entrepreneur and some kind of researcher, because you're hooking people into an idea and you're communicating with them in a way that engages with them, and you're telling them why what you're interested in and what you're passionate about matters. So I think in that sense there is some real alignment. There's just, yeah, they're just two slightly different disciplines with different conventions, but yeah, there is that similarity, I think, that bonds them together.
That's fantastic. Yeah, I can see what you mean there about, yeah, you're trying to hook people into your ideas, just, you know, perhaps in slightly different contexts, but that's the core of it. Well, thank you, Penny, and we'll come back to you shortly once we've heard from the other panelists. So next up we have Natalia. Natalia, would you mind turning your microphone on and giving us a bit of a flavour of how you got from the University of Westminster to where you are now?
Okay, yes. So I think good evening, everyone. So I'm Natalie Sally. I'm currently an engagement manager at Health Watch Lambeth, one of the London boroughs, more deprived London boroughs. And I think my journey in research started even before I went to become a student in Westminster University. That was in 2006 and 2000 until 2009. So when I was still in the Philippines and newly graduate from the College of Social Work in a university, I got interested in child labor research. So I applied as a research assistant in the University of the Philippines, because as a social worker, I think my passion is to work with people, but also to understand the issues of people. And there's no other way of doing that but to venture into research and to understand and to talk to people, not just social work or community development. So I got into the university, and it started from there. So in my career in the Philippines, before I migrated to the United Kingdom, I was always a social worker, also a teacher in the university, and as well as, community development. And in all those, I have been doing small pieces of research just to understand people's issues, because I got frustrated when you are doing research and there's nothing that comes out from the research. What you've written stays in the university, or it got published, for example, with other co-researchers, but that's it. So I was more interested in having the research really tested, and the recommendations and the findings and the insights that came from it, that resulted from talking to people, at that time to child laborers, which was instrumental in actually passing a legislation on child labor in the Philippines. That was in late 80s towards the early 90s. So, and it got me inspired actually through research. You can, as you have experienced, Sarah, and I think Penny, through research you can make a difference in policy making. And that started when I migrated to the United Kingdom. I was managing different charities, and I've always been in volunteer organizations, the volunteer sector. So and the more you engage with people, I think the more you realize that actually my skills in research would be useful. And I got into the University of Westminster when I was working in the London Borough of Southwark. not in the SADC, it's Community Action SADC, which is an umbrella organization for volunteer organizations and community organizations in SADC. And I was fortunate to have a place they have a program then for managers to get a postgraduate diploma in management. So I took that opportunity. So for 3 years, I studied in Westminster University with postgraduate diploma in health and social care management, which was really helpful. And it took so much writing. It's about modules and writing, but also about talking to people and what you write. And because I love writing and talking to people and being with people, and that's the nature of being maybe a social care professional, is there's the nature of the business, as you may call them, is to talk to people. Otherwise, you will not be able to serve the community. So in managing small organizations, I have often worked with children, young people, adults with learning disability, people with additional learning and additional needs, people with mental health conditions, and families. And also that frustration of, well, they are not being heard. And there are so much on the ground that our policymakers are not familiar on the issues. So I think that led me to where I work now, which is Health Watch Lambeth. Because Health Watch, we have, for the full information of everyone, we have, I think, over 150 health watches in the country. And what the role entails is to listen and to be the voice for people who are deemed to be hard to reach, but they are not hard to reach. You just go to them and listen to them. And so with the public engagement hat in Health Watch Lambeth, I was able to understand not only the issues, but also what can be done to our health and social care system, specifically in Lambeth. And that's the same kind of work that other health watches are doing in different parts of the country. So from public engagement to informing the policies and service development for children and families, across all ages, from birth to older people, and different service providers, assisting them also in auditing or assessing what they are providing to people. So we would go into hospitals, for example, and GPs through our enter and view role in Health Watch, and listen to their patients and understand how their experience of health and care can be used to improve the services in health and social care. So, I was inspired. Yes, I was inspired, and when I went back to the Philippines, then because of this innovation in making research actually accessible and using it into policy making, I started the One Child, One Tree Foundation in the Philippines, which is also based in research, but is more environmental research. It's research about mangroves and trees and biodiversity and the carbon capture, being the carbon dioxide, which is being sequestered by the roots of mangroves. And that led me to now, and I also got interested because I like the rigor in the academic research as well, because that's one thing that we should not be forgetting. Even if we venture into innovation, being trained in academic research is really fantastic, because you will have the rigor, and wherever you go, that kind of rigor in research will be with you, and you can apply that in the charity sector, in public sector, in health sector.
Thank you. That's really fascinating. Yeah, that's so interesting. And I think, we've seen from your career path, your motivation from being a social worker, and that leading you into your research and really focusing on making sure that research didn't stay on a shelf, as you say, but that was engaged with the public and turned into policies to change things. So I really want to hear some more about what you were saying on and your latest venture with One Child, One Tree. But I'll just move over to the next panelist just for now, and I'll come back to all of you with a few more questions on research and innovation in a minute. But thank you so much, Natalia.
You're welcome.
Can I just now introduce Lem? Thank you, Lem, for joining us. And just hand over to you, really. You're in a research position at the moment. Can you just tell us what your journey was like from University of Westminster to where you are now?
Thank you very much, Sarah. Hello, everyone. So I was a student at Westminster University. I did my master's in public health. Obviously, that was I think my second exposure to research. My first experience was my undergraduate research, which was mostly quantitative. But when I did my master's research, this was in public health and nutrition. It was more qualitative research. And also, while being a student at Westminster University, I was involved in various other projects as an intern and as a project assistant. So my research was mostly qualitative in nature. And this is the kind of research that brings you in contact with people and you get to ask them questions and try to answer these questions through people's experiences. So one of the things that I really found fascinating through my experiences was the fact that I could actually carve out my own path and decide what questions I wanted to answer. And specifically with my master's research, I realized from my study that, we live in a society where we have policies that kind of direct us on things that we should do or things that are advisable to do. Take, for example, in the health discipline. But then when I did my research, I found out that sometimes there are gaps. There can't be recommendations around what people should be doing. But when you come to the practical side of things, if you haven't actually spoken to people to understand the experiences and the day-to-day experiences and challenges that they go through, it might actually not be possible for these policies to be put into practice. So that's what I found interesting. The fact that research actually gave me the opportunity to ask questions and bring out these gaps and, inform further policies and inform practice and inform how people live their lives. And from then I had more questions from my master's research, and that's what led me on to my PhD. So in between my master's and my PhD, I worked on several other research projects, both quantitative and qualitative, but all of them still within the public health space. And then I started doing my PhD. My PhD was on obesity in African migrant women in the UK, and also a qualitative project. I really do love qualitative research. But then also when I started doing my PhD, that's when I started my own organization, which is Core Africa. And my organization basically was around addressing challenges that other students in settings like African countries are experiencing with academic research, and really just spreading out these key messages around how research can be so impactful for society and how it can help us to identify, challenges around us and seek solutions for these. So yeah, that's just a brief background around my work. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lem. That's really fascinating, and I think you've touched on one of the reasons why a research career was appealing to you, and maybe it would be to some of our participants as well, is that idea that you get to choose your path, your questions, you get to determine what it is you want to study. So I've got a couple of questions that would be interesting for all the panelists, and I want you just to take these together and jump in. We'll spend about maybe 5 or 10 minutes on these questions, and then we'll go across to talking about some practical skills, tips and advice, and we've got some questions on those as well already in the chat. So just on your experiences of research and innovation, I thought it might be good just to dig a little bit more into what each of you said about why you wanted to be a researcher. So what is it that appealed to you about going into research from where you started? And I suppose now that you're all in it in some way or another, you know, is it what you thought it would be? You know, or has it turned out to be different or better or more challenging in some ways? So, Lem, can I start with you, because we've just been hearing from you, but you told us a little bit about, you know, what it was that attracted you to research. So, yeah, maybe just tell us a bit more about why you wanted to be a researcher.
Yeah, so I think, first of all, I've always had a very curious mind, and I ask a lot of questions naturally. So it was just a natural thing to me to want to understand more about, you know, why things happen, you know, why they happen the way they do. You know, we are in a society where things are changing really rapidly, and I want it to be, you know, part of the movement of trying to, you know, make our societies better, and in my own small way have an impact on whatever sector it is that I decide to work on. So the interest for me was, first of all, having realized that when you do research, you're actually able to inform or to impact something, you know, because research, the purpose for me, I look at research as doing something to actually bring out a new idea or a new service or a new method to create something new. So when you carry out a research project and you bring out research findings and you publish these research findings, other people are able to read your work, and this is able to inform future research. It's also able to inform the creation of other things, further services or products or whatsoever. So for me, it was really an attractive field. And the second thing for me is the people I meet when I do research. So I think in my experience, I've met so many people that I think I would never actually have met in any other kind of field. And it's really interesting that, you know, in a conversation amongst researchers, it's not, you know, it's the kind of environment where everyone's open to learning. So you always have something to bring to the table, and no matter how experienced you are, you can always learn from someone else. So I think that kind of space is really nice because you can thrive. You're able to share what you think, and you're also able to learn from other people. And that's another attractive thing. And thirdly, for me, I think one of the beautiful things about research is how you're able to measure your progress and track how you're moving along. So say, for example, you've published a paper, that's success. You've completed a project, you've attended a conference or presented at a conference. There's so many things you can do within the research space, and that I find really, really attractive.
Thanks, Lam. That's definitely sparked a few kind of questions in my mind. I want to hear from the other panelists, but I think some of what you've said links up to questions people have asked in the chat already, because you've talked about being motivated by that impact that you can have in a fast-moving society, you know, creating something that creates change. And I think one of our questions is really about how you measure that impact. So perhaps we'll come back to that in a moment, but Natalia, can you tell us a little bit more about why you wanted to be a researcher?
Thanks, Sarah. And in addition to what Lem has said, I think impact is one of the things in my list as the reasons why I would like to be a researcher. Because as I've said earlier, it's one thing to have a glossy, you know, printed copy of research, but another thing to make a difference in the community. So for me, I think the bottom line is so that I can help contribute for people to have better experience of the environment, better experience of health and care, better experience of the world. And you can only have that when you are also involving them. So I think for me, it's two things, research and public participation. So in research, you get to know people, you get to understand where they are coming from, and you use that insights to also assist them on what programs, what innovation we can do together. And I think there's a bit of ownership when you do it like that, because you are not imposing to them things that you are wanting, but help them shape up what they have identified. And for them, it's also very enabling and empowering. So I think as a social worker, I come with that hat of enabling. One of our principles is to enable and to empower people. So I think I use research to do that. And also with research, there's a bit of flexibility and you can use your creativity. You know, as Lem said, you can choose a topic that might be of interest to you. But I think I also would like to emphasize that it's not just doing research, but it's also about what you notice in the environment. And if you are a researcher, you can be really a keen observer of what's happening in the environment. And that's why I would like to remain as a researcher and even improve. And lastly, it's also about reaching out. When you do research, I get to meet different types of people, different students who now are very interested in research as their career. So I get to mentor students from public schools in the Philippines and also some mentoring some students in Westminster. And they are now, they are sort of planning their careers toward being a researcher or having something to do with research. So I think that kind of, it's very fulfilling and rewarding to not to influence, but to encourage people to also know about things and innovate as well as make a difference in your community.
Thank you so much, Natalia. Yeah, that really spoken to what motivated you. And Penny, I'm going to turn to you and ask you what motivated you to want to be a researcher. But I just want to pick up on something that Natalia said about being attracted by all those connections to different people. And I think Lem talked about that, the people you meet. And I know you mentioned you characterized your PhD as it could be quite solitary, and I think that can be the experience for people. I think it probably varies a little bit across the disciplines and the sort of type of research you're doing, but I thought it's worth surfacing that and just discussing between us whether research is solitary or it is something that's very highly interconnected, or what determines that. Is it just a question of what subject you're studying, or is it a question of what direction you take your research in? So Penny, I'll hand over to you and to talk about what made you want to be a researcher. Thanks,
Sarah. I think actually I really resonated with what Lem and Natalia were saying. It's the hope that you can make a positive impact on something that you think is important. So actually, in a way, I don't want to add too much more to that. But one of the things you mentioned earlier, Sarah, was whether there was anything unexpected, in between my expectations of research and the reality. I had a couple of thoughts on some things that I hadn't expected, which maybe I can share. I think because my research, the background is sociological. So I think when I pictured doing research, it was very much picturing, writing and writing and writing. And there was a lot of writing, of course there was. But actually, one of the things I didn't expect was how much it is like project management, that it's about managing very large amounts of data, putting them into some kind of coherent order, whether that's, other papers or whether that's your own data that you're gathering. And also your own processes as well. As a researcher, I think in many research roles, you have a degree of independence, and that freedom is a real privilege, but also, it can be a bit intimidating in some ways to be able to really structure your own time. And so I didn't expect to spend so much time thinking about how best I should work and how best I should order my own processes. And then the second thing that I'd like to mention that I didn't really expect with the PhD or with the entrepreneurship actually is the challenge of the emotional element of research. That as a researcher or as an entrepreneur, you're saying, this matters. And you're saying, hey, everyone, look at me. This matters. This is my stance. And that takes courage to do that. It takes courage to come out and say something that you believe in. It takes courage to receive feedback openly which will help improve your work, but also have that balance of taking that feedback, but maintaining and finding your own voice at the same time. And so I think that there's there is an intellectual exercise in that, but just as much I feel there's an emotional muscle that you need to strengthen to keep having courage to say what you think matters, and to engage in that conversation with people openly, and willing to receive criticism and improvement.
Well, I think that's a terrific insight to share, Penny. Thank you for that. Both of those differences. I certainly recognise what you're saying about the emotional challenge, cost of finding your own voice, which I suppose people do in a variety of ways, but certainly, as everyone has said on the panel, research is about identifying something new and using it, something that nobody's identified or said before, and using it in a way to create a difference. But to do that, you're going to have to stand up and be counted and say what it is that you think you have found, and stand up for that. So yeah, I think that's a great insight. I'm just going to sort of ask you as a panel to reflect on one more thing before we go to practical skills and tips and advice, and that is really, I suppose, the what you think is innovation. You've all talked about one of your motivations for research being contributing to a fast-moving world, a world which could be improved by new knowledge, and innovation, I think, is a word that bears lots of different definitions, and people can think of it in different ways. But I'd be interested in what innovation means to you, and how, for you connect research and innovation. And Penny, if you don't mind, I'll just offer that one out to you first. I mean, you've got, if you like, the most obvious sort of example of doing them both at the same time. But I'm just interested in your thoughts.
Thank you. So I think, when I think innovation, I believe we mean change, and specifically change that is an improvement. And I definitely think that research and innovation are very intrinsically linked, because we can't improve something unless we understand the problem. And those improvements are going to be optimized when we're testing them and when we're iterating upon those solutions. So yeah, I think research is inherently part of innovation. And as well as that, I think research mindset also helps us to interrogate the status quo, the things that we don't even realize are beliefs, the things we don't even realize are our own assumptions. And innovation, it's always meant making things better, but a research mindset helps us ask questions like, well, what does better really mean? Better for who? Who is left out of that equation? How might this innovation have unintended consequences? So I think that kind of research mindset helps innovation to be more conscientious. So yes, research should absolutely inherently be part of the innovative process.
So yeah, and just to sort of dig in and maybe challenge it more, play devil's advocate. I can see your argument that research is a part of innovation, but is it possible to do research without doing innovation? And is that valuable and worthwhile as well? Because some of our participants here might be quite interested in just the research part and not necessarily the innovation part. So do they have to go hand in hand? Is there a place for one on its own?
Yeah, I guess that's the knowledge for knowledge's sake being a positive thing. And I suppose, like, on a personal level, I've always been a bit more drawn to research that I can see has some kind of impact. And I think as well, from what I understand of academia, there's a bit more of a lean towards emphasizing research having this kind of real world impact thing. But I think there has to be a value in research that doesn't necessarily obviously have an impact. And sometimes maybe it's because that impact is quite obscured, like maybe something you're doing is very theoretical, but somewhere down the line. it could have an impact on something. But then I do believe that knowledge for knowledge's sake, it does enrich us to learn things, to think of different ways to understand things. So I certainly do see a value in that kind of research as well.
Yeah, I agree. I'm not asking the question because I have a particular bias towards one or the other. I tend to think about the potential impacts as well. But I suppose, if we think back historically, there have been lots of examples of research which have been used much later for innovation and in unexpected ways. And I suppose one of the key criteria is that the research is rigorous, as I think Natalia said earlier. It's robust and it's recorded. And then if it's those things, I think other people can innovate on the back of it. So sorry, Natalia, I just turned off my microphone. Did you want to say something on there?
Yes, and I think I agree with you. And I think knowledge for knowledge's sake is sort of the world in the academe. And as a PhD student in another university, I think we mentioned a while ago, and this is in connection to this, your question, is the PhD tends to be very isolating and it tends to be solitary. But also there's a bit of innovation when you are in academic research, for example, is that you get to present to conferences and you get to present your ideas, and in return you get some ideas and insights from participants of those conferences. But I think for me, innovation in research is also has a way of demystifying research itself, because we know research is very academic, and I think when you go to the community, it's as if we owe the academic world that kind of support, if they need it, to demystify the kind of research in an academic environment and to make it more accessible to people. For example, I use what I learned in my PhD thesis, which is migration, experience of Filipino migrants in migration experience and how this impacts on their mental health and emotional well-being, which is for academic perspective, there's a lot of writing, there's a lot of interviews with 25 students. But how I would like to use this, if I would like to be innovative, is to go through Filipino organizations, for example, and to share what I have found and to influence and to use it as an advocacy information for those supporting migrants in the UK, not only Filipinos, but supporting migrants from different ethnicities, from different countries. So I think that kind of demystifying research, but then there has to be balance between, yes, we don't water down research. We can, one from the academic world, I think, and I don't have any bias in this as well because I love both, being as an academic researcher with my PhD, as well as being in the public engagement arena. But I don't want research to be watered down and to be seen as, yes, you just talk to people and it's research. No, there's rigor. And I think as students and our participants would agree that the discipline that we get from our academic training would be useful when we innovate, when we go to that innovation. And for me, innovation just means simply maybe more networking, more advocacy, more use of your research, your findings to make a difference. And I think those complement each other rather than there's one academic and there's this innovation. So one has to go, both have to go hand in hand.
Yeah, so it's sort of on a spectrum rather than two different things.
Yes.
Lem, I'm going to come to you and I'm going to move on to the sort of practical skills, tips and advice section, to the second section of this, but I want to come to you first. So I'd like to take this section in a couple of categories. And I think one of the things we can talk about is what are the sort of personal characteristics or competencies that enable, that equips someone to be a researcher or an innovator. And I think we've heard some already. We've heard about rigor. We've heard about that sort of project management sort of element of handling data, the courage. We've heard about I don't know, conviction, I suppose, in what you're doing. But so I'm going to just ask you if you've got any thoughts on, what skills, competencies you think someone might need to do well as a researcher and innovator. And maybe there isn't a particular set, maybe it's open to everyone, but just from your point of view, what do you think are the characteristics that have helped you?
Yeah, thank you for that. I think there are several, so I'm just going to talk on the few that I think are really key. The very first one for me, I think, is the ability to plan and manage your time. So I think one of the biggest factors that can lead to the failure of a research project right from the start is actually not being able to plan the research stages and think about how much time it's going to take you to do the research project, and even planning and thinking about what you're going to need to do your research. So planning and time management is really key. And then there is critical thinking. So there are perhaps different definitions of critical thinking, but as a researcher, you should be able to read, other people's work and listen to what other people have done, and then think about what your ideas are, and also look at how these relate to each other, to be able to look at what's out there, what the literature says out there, what are the gaps that you're identifying, what are your justifications for the research that you're planning to do, and at the end of your research, how do we make sense of what you've done? So you need to be able to think beyond what you're seeing, think really deep. So critical thinking is really key. And part of that is finding information and managing this information. So, now with all the technology that we have, there's so much information online. Of course, there is information that's scientifically maybe proven, and there is also information that's from websites that are maybe not credible. So you need to be able to identify what information is relevant for your research. You can't just go out there and Google and copy everything you find out there and put into your research project or report, because that's not, you have to be able to find what's relevant for your research. And even in connection to that as well, being able to communicate this information. So scientific writing is a key skill. It's different from the everyday language that we use, communicating with family and friends. How do you write this information in a way that someone out there can read it and think, oh, this person actually thought about this and didn't just, fill up the paper with words. So scientific writing is a key skill. And I think the last one for me is attention to detail. I think, like Penny said, there's a lot of information. You have to make sense of a lot of information, and you have to bring this down into a smaller portion of something that people can read and actually understand what you've done. So attention to detail is one of these skills. Usually when I talk about skills needed for research, I know that passion is not a skill in itself, but I always talk about passion because as a researcher, the first thing for me, I think, is being passionate about what you're doing your research on. And I'm not talking about saying, oh, I'm passionate about cancer research, for example, or I love this. Another person should be able to feel your passion when you're talking about your research, because that passion is what actually takes you through to the end. Without passion, it's really easy to, just give up and decide, especially if you can't remember the reason why you started doing it in the first place, or if your reason wasn't strong enough and you weren't very passionate about it from the beginning. It's basically recipe for disaster. So I think those are a few of the key things that you need to be able to do research.
Well, thank you, Lem. I think that's a terrific tour around some of the characteristics that are going to help you in the audience in your research career. I would back all of those 100%. I think that's a really excellent summary, and all of those things are important. Certainly were when I was doing my research career as well, that ability to be discerning, to sort out huge amounts of information and work out what's important and what's not, and to synthesize and think about what it all means, you know, to extrapolate into the future. And you know, absolutely brilliant points there on the communication, scientific communication, and absolutely on the passion to keep you going, because there are challenges along the way and you will need to believe in what you're doing to keep you going. So thank you, Lem. And I think for Natalia, I might ask you, what do you think are some of the challenges in working in research and innovation?
I think too of resources in particular, and as we know, research and innovation can be time consuming. So resources in terms of money, your time, workforce. If you're alone, you will maybe find it difficult to undertake a research project, and that's why I think some innovation is needed in terms of maybe training some volunteers, which I do with One Child, One Tree, and training them on how to do research, some interview skills, so that they can support me when I do research, being alone in this foundation. So I think those are the three challenges, mainly resources, a workforce, time, and money, because to go to the community, especially now with the COVID-19 restrictions, the cost has doubled. For example, when I go to the field to talk to people, I will make sure that I only take a few volunteers, but a large boat, because we have to ride a boat to go to a coastal community. So a boat that usually can accommodate 10, you can only have 5 now because of physical distancing. So there's cost that's attached to it. And the mask and, the PPE that you have to provide your volunteers and other researchers or other partners that you will be meeting in the field. So those, I think, are the challenges. And I think a motivation could be as well a challenge, especially a challenge in a way as well as an encouragement, because the lack of motivation brought about, because researchers are also not superhuman. So you get emotional sometimes and get affected by the pandemic, and all these restrictions. And if you are also juggling so many pieces of work, I think sometimes it's very demotivating. So you get to find ways on how to continuously motivate yourself. So the challenge there is how to continuously motivate yourself, that you are doing these different projects, you're also studying, and you're also doing something for the community. So I think I will let Penny and Lim to talk about challenges if they'd like to add as well.
I think those are all really good challenges, and I want to worth being aware of. And I want to give you as a panel a chance to also talk about the highlights and what's the good stuff about being in research and innovation. But I think I might leave that for the end so that we can end on a high note. But Penny, another question I wanted to come to for our audience really is, have you got any thoughts on what students and graduates could be doing to create a successful foundation for a career as a researcher? Is there anything that you could share that you think that is a helpful sort of activities to get themselves into at this stage?
Yeah, thanks, Sarah. So personally, the path that I took to doing a PhD was to do a master's in social research methods. So really that was very helpful for me to get a grounding in the skills that I ended up using to conduct my research. But that is just one path, and most of my peers didn't have that similar background. So I don't think you do have to do a master's in research methods. Certainly at Westminster, there are opportunities to learn methodologies once you've started your PhD. So, I mean, other things you could do to give yourself a grounding, if you can, maybe consider internships with research bodies like NatSen, think tanks, or even sort of market research. So Kantar Media is one example. I would say, talk to people in the research industry, go to events, look if there's meetups that are relevant, connect with people via LinkedIn. If there's someone whose research you really like, connect with them. They'll probably be willing to talk with you. because they'll just be delighted that someone is appreciative of their research, get a taste of what their jobs are like, and start building those networks and contacts. And actually, for me, as I mentioned at the beginning of this session, I found my PhD supervisor through an internship. And to get this internship, I had to go to an event because I tried phoning them, but I was told by the receptionist, oh, we don't really do internships. So I was undeterred to an event. I knew what the people looked like from the website. And then I did that horrible thing where you just walk up to people you've never met and stick your hand out and say, hello, my name's blah, blah, blah. And I didn't enjoy it at all, because really, I think probably very few people really enjoy doing that. But it was really worth it. So it's worth taking those opportunities, even if, like me, that's basically your idea of a nightmare. It is worth doing. And actually, once you say hello to people and start talking to them, it's actually really nice. And you meet a lot of great people that way. So I think, yes, there's like the more formal routes that you can go down, training, internships. But I would really say just find people who are doing something similar to what you would like to do and talk to them.
That's fantastic. Thank you for sharing that story with us. And I think it shows great resilience as well, which is another great characteristic for researchers, to not be put off by someone saying, no, you can't have what you want. And I think Penny's shown us how she just found a way around that. So that's fantastic. I think that takes us into a period of this evening where we can sort of talk about and share any useful resources. I believe that the moderators will be collecting together useful links and references to organisations that we make during this and sending them around to you later. But I'm going to ask the panel now if they want to talk about any resources that they have found helpful or they think might be helpful for you. And then I'm going to move on to the Q&A, and we've got some great questions already. So I'll just spend a couple of minutes with the panel to see if anyone wants to particularly highlight a resource or point people in a particular direction. And I'll just open it up to all of you. So if you have something you want to share, just unmute yourself and start talking.
Hello. I put a few in there, but I'll just mention one in particular, because I get the feeling quite a lot of people here this evening may be interested in pursuing a PhD. I was recommended the book. It's called How to Get a PhD. And I got this just before I think I started applying, and it's super useful. I mean, it's probably £10 to £15, so it is a bit of money, but I would say if you're seriously considering a PhD, it's well worth it. It guides you through the whole process, including applying for a PhD. And then also it just gives you an idea of what you might expect from the process as well. So I think it's a good resource.
Yeah, so just to share my experience, not a resource per se, but just talking about how I found myself doing a PhD and even with my current job, and just adding to what Penny had said earlier about speaking to people. So when I was a master's student, I always showed interest in taking part in other research projects that were not my dissertation. So my supervisors, other projects that they were doing, I would usually ask them questions around what kind of research they were working on, and just showing interest and asking them if they had any opportunities, if they needed any support, maybe they wanted me to do some data collection or anything like that. I mean, they could say no at the time, but then if anything comes along, you would be the first person they would think of. So I actually got to find my PhD opportunity through my master supervisor, because I had been taking part and showing interest and doing some internships on other projects she was working on. And the job I'm currently doing now, I got that through my PhD supervisors as well. When I was a PhD student, I was also doing a lot of other part-time research assistant projects. So usually it's very useful to speak to other people who are doing research and just showing that kind of interest in the institute, in the wider work, whatever university you're at. And that's how you can get other opportunities to do research.
Did you want to come in, Natalia?
Yes, I was waiting for them. This okay, and I will just send I think to James and to you, to the university, James, who has been coordinating this, a list of some books which have been really helpful as I go through my PhD for a long time, because I'm doing it part time. But also for those who would like to have a career maybe in health what's. There's a lot of opportunity as engagement managers, insights officer, to do small pieces of research and public engagement. We also, HealthWatch England has also published a research governance framework, which is also has rigor and follows academic research, planning, but also talks about community research. So, and in a way that you will have done in a particular organization like HealthWatch Lambeth, but it mirrors the academic research that we are doing for our PhD. So I will also send the link to James so that it can be included. And I think that's it. Thank you.
Okay, so one of the themes of the questions has been around money, and Natalia, you talked in about resource as being a challenge. So we got some questions which are really about how do you get the money to do a PhD? How is it financially sustainable? Now, Penny's book will probably cover some of that, but have any of you on the panel got anything you want to share now on actually, the financial implications of doing a PhD? I mean, are you going to be, is PhD funding going to be enough to live on? Where are you going to get it from? Is it enough to support a family? Does it sort of run out halfway through and stop, or does it see you all the way through to beginning to end? And I suppose where did you find your money from? But that's a lot of questions I've just said to you. But if any of you on the panel want to just say anything about money for PhDs, then go for it. Now, Natalia, you're sitting there on my screen already. Do you want to say anything about that?
Yes, maybe I will not be of any help in terms of funding, but I subscribe to different funding for study PhD studentships, newsletters like that, where fundings would be posted, and you can receive some emails on this if you are interested in studentships, then you can apply for this. And if your area of specialization or interest would be aligned to a particular university's funding, then that might be a good opportunity for you to try. My PhD is fully funded by the College of Social Work. I went through a competitive scholarship application, and I was fortunate to get it. So the College of Social Work is paying for my PhD, whilst I also do a full-time job. So I think they pay the tuition and everything, and give me some allowance to buy things. But I can work, so I don't have any issue or any problem in finding the money for my PhD. But I have seen several opportunities, which I think if you are resourceful enough, you will find those. Because different universities, I think, offer also scholarships to those who would like to, to try. That's maybe a good opportunity to pursue a PhD.
Thank you, Natalia. The other panelists, do you have anything to add on money?
Yeah, just adding to what Natalia said, universities usually have different funding streams for students. So there's a website, it's called findaphd.com. You can also search on there, and you can actually narrow down your searches to only find PhD opportunities that are funded. They're listed on the website, so that's usually a good place to start. And then there's also funding that can come from places like research councils, like the Medical Research Council. They usually have funding for students within the medical sciences. So those are good places to look into. I also know that you can find funded research opportunities through certain organizations or charities. If your project is in line with their work and they are interested in what you're proposing to them, then they could potentially fund what you want to do. So there's different ways to find these opportunities.
Thank you, Lem, for all of those. Yeah, and across different disciplines, there are research councils for all the different disciplines. So one of the jobs I had earlier was working for the Medical Research Council, who give out money, but there are lots of other research councils. And I mentioned earlier these learned and professional societies. Now, they are bodies that represent certain interests across a whole huge range of disciplines. But if you have an area and you can find an institution or an association that's related to that, they can probably advise you as well on where to find funding. Thank you for those. Sorry, I'm just going to go back and check my questions. We had a question from Maria, and she said, how do you balance doing research in the UK and creating innovation in your home country or region? I suppose that could apply to if that's actually a different country to the UK, but I suppose it could apply to just creating innovation in a different context to your research. And she says, what are the advantages or disadvantages? So I don't know if I'm fairly representing Maria's question here, but I get a sense that she's trying to dig into, I suppose, how you apply your learning, and how you can translate it into a community you're interested in.
May I answer that? Because I think I have a lived experience of being a researcher in the UK, a student in the UK, both in the Westminster University and now Royal Holloway University, but also have a very successful family advocacy foundation in the Philippines. So I think the skills that you get from being a researcher in the UK are transferable, and I think people will agree. If you are originally from other countries, it will also apply to other countries. So because skills are really transferable, I think it's the environment that might be a challenge, where in the UK there are some resources, there are opportunities for funding. When you go to a third world country like the Philippines, there's no funding for research. So I work doubly hard to raise funding. And we do a lot of fundraising. I write so many proposals, and most of them are successful. And this is also very interesting to know that there are those public or private individuals and organizations who are willing to fund, even in the Philippines, to fund your research, to fund your project. So it only takes a bit of resourcefulness and really digging, finding where they are. And networking is really important. As our other panelists said, you talk to people, you go to where events are, even if it's webinar, you get to meet different kinds of people, and different opportunities will present themselves, because they might be offering small amount of money to fund your small research. What I do is to go to the local government unit, because they have allocated some funding for small pieces of projects in the community. So I think it takes a bit of just resourcefulness and finding where they are, and also talking to them.
Thank you, Natalia. Yeah, Lem, yes, absolutely.
Just a little addition to what Natalia said in reference to transferable skills. So we use a train the trainer kind of approach. So you've got skills, so you start with a small team, say the team is in the UK, and then you have another team in another country, and you train them on a particular program. So for example, my work in African countries with my organization is around developing research training workshops and training programs for students and early career researchers. So say, for example, we're doing a training on how to conduct a systematic review. We will train a team on how to deliver this training session. And then we here don't have to be there when that's done. We can just come in sometimes to review how the program is being delivered and look at the outcomes of the program. So the skills that you get from doing research is transferable. So you can get some skills and train someone on how to do something, and then they train the next person and so on. So that's one way of managing doing research across different places. Okay.
Thank you. There are a couple of questions which are really around careers and what careers might be available to you if you do research, if you do a PhD or a master's. So we've got people asking questions about, well, could I be a lecturer if I didn't have a PhD? I've got a question about companies, research companies, and what are the research companies that we can apply to, and I've got a question that's around professional doctorates and whether they are helpful in progressing in your career. But I wanted actually just to really put the whole broad question of what are the potential careers that one can go into having done some research to the panel. I described earlier my current role, and I work in policy and politics. I work very closely to government, so I work in an advocacy role, and I have a research career, so that's my experience is quite, I no longer work in an area that's directly related to research. But each of you on the panel, I just wondered if you could say something about what you think are the possible career avenues after research. And Penny, do you mind if I go to you, just because we haven't heard from you just for a minute? Is that okay?
Yeah, sure. So I think, there's a broad range of career paths you can take from research. Academia is just one of those paths. So think about, for example, market research, all the scientific research, health research, social research, research and evaluation of policy, even research for TV and entertainment. Think about think tanks. And consultancy is another one. So the company that I'm a part of, we're a consultancy, but actually what really informs our consultancy is research, and from that, content creation. So really, I think it does arm you with a really good set of transferable skills, and you can take research into a lot of different places.
Yeah, thank you. And I think, point on consultancy is a really good one. A whole range of careers. And I think you don't have to think of the careers after research as being a continuation of that research. It can go in different directions. And Lem or Natalia, Lem, did you want to come in there?
Yeah, so there's also other more specific things, if you like, if you wanted to do. For example, you could decide to be an information scientist, where your role in an organization or in a company is helping them to find the information they need and managing that information. And that's all part of research. You could be an epidemiologist or a statistician. You could even narrow it down to a specific type of research. For example, if you enjoy qualitative research like I do, you could decide to be a qualitative researcher. And there are always organizations like the NHS and different charities looking for people to come and collect interview data and analyze this data. You could be a data analyst. So even thinking about companies as well, say for example, tech companies or pharmaceutical industries, usually they need people to come and do some sort of research activities for them to test their products or just to assess the need for their products. So there's so much you can do as a researcher, both in academia and in industry.
Thank you, Lem. That's fantastic. I think just while we get towards the end of our session, I wanted to ask one question that I think we haven't asked. I think is worth asking, and it could encourage people to get into research and innovation, and that's really around sort of any gaps in representation. So, have you experienced any representation gaps in your research careers? And, do you think you would encourage the people on the call here to enter into a research and innovation career? Natalia, you're on my screen, so why don't you start? Oh no. Yeah, Natalia, you want to give us a
Okay.
start?
Yes, I think from attending different conferences, I think us as a PhD student, I have noticed a gap in people who go into research from different there's a gap in terms of ethnicity. So I think, and that's why I think different universities have schemes now to encourage more people from multi-ethnic communities to venture into research or to study PhD or anything to do with research, because there's really a gap in there. I also think I haven't noticed if there's a gender gap as well, or just male or female researchers. But from my work, I think it tends to be more women who are doing social science research and public engagement research. So I think we need some more men. So if some of our participants would like to also work in the volunteer sector, public engagement, and if you are male, you will really add some value, because we also need to get a balance between amongst different genders. And I don't think, I can't prove this, but in terms of social economic or social status of people, because research and being a student in PhD tends to be really costly. You have to pay thousands of pounds unless you get some scholarship or bursary or studentship. I think there's also a gap on those who might be in the lower income bracket. So I think that's another gap, social status. Because instead of, you will have to earn extra to be able to pay your studies.
Thank you, Natalia. Thank you. Really helpful. Anyone else on the panel want to chip in on this question?
Just a few months ago, actually, I had worked on this project. We were looking at gender representations within medical research in the UK, so in clinical academia. And well, the reasons generally there are more men than women, especially going up the ladder. So, of course, there are several reasons why we could understand maybe fewer women wanting to stay longer in that career path. So things like having children and, other family responsibilities. But then, there are policies in place to enable the environment to be supportive for both men and women. So I think it's just about encouraging females from a younger age to really consider careers down this path and, see it as something worthwhile, something worth doing.
Thank you, Lem. Penny, did you want to come in?
Sure, maybe just quickly, because I know we're pretty near the end of the session. I think I do agree with what Lem and Natalia have said in terms of what I've witnessed while doing a PhD. And one positive thing I've seen that the University of Westminster has done is that they have some PhD scholarships specifically for BAME candidates. And I think initiatives like that, they're a positive step. There's still a way to go. But I just wanted to say that I think I think all of us would agree it's really important that institutions do encourage diversity, because researchers have an opportunity to be leaders and change makers. So if we want changes that benefit everyone, we need our change makers to have diverse perspectives and diverse experiences. And so I hope that anyone here listening to this who is from a minority background or from a background that you don't typically see in academia, perhaps, I hope that you feel really encouraged and empowered. And I hope what you're hearing is we need you. Come, don't be discouraged. Come and be part of the change.
Fantastic, Penny. And that leads me on to what I wanted to do last of all, which was that I asked Natalia earlier a question about what were the big challenges of working in research and innovation, and she gave some very honest thoughts on that. But I want to finish by asking all of you on the panel, like, what are the highlights of working in research and innovation? So give me, like, what makes your skin tingle and what makes you happy to be a researcher and innovator? And Penny, if you don't mind, I'll start with you.
Yeah, sure. I think being in a job where you're permitted not to know and you can be curious and can learn, that's really wonderful. And being able to be on the cutting edge of whatever it is you do, and being part of a team who is in the business of creating knowledge or creating a solution is really exciting. And related to that, I love the field work. I think that's what it's all about for me. Like, actually the moments where you get out there, and in the case of what I do, you know, spend time talking to people or spend time around people. So yeah, getting your hands stuck into the real world, I would say.
Fantastic. And Natalia?
I think it's both the impact that you are contributing to achieve and making some changes, contributing to changes in people's experiences, empowering them and enabling them are some of the highlights. But also on a personal level, you get to learn new things. You get to question your own prejudices and biases by talking to people, that there's another schools of thoughts, that not just your perspective. So I think both professionally and personally, you will be enriched through venturing into research.
Thank you. And last but not least, Lem.
Yeah, so just a few months ago, I think that was in July, I got an invitation to an interview on live TV. That was back in my country in Cameroon. And I was so excited, my first time actually, you know, being on live TV. I was thinking, you know, opportunities like this won't just come because people want to know Lem. It's because they want to know about my work. And, you know, just opening myself to such opportunities is really wonderful. And even the work that I've done in the UK, day after day, I get all these emails about wanting to know more about my project findings and wanting to collaborate to work on some of my research recommendations. You know, it's just wonderful. It really opens up doors to meeting a lot of people in different countries, in different parts of the world, and even invitations to travel and present your research at conferences in other countries. So that's just really exciting for me.
Yeah. Fantastic. That sounds exciting. I think I get excited too if I'll get asked to talk on TV. I don't know, it makes me very excited. And that's wonderful. Thank you, Lem. And thank you to all of you for joining us for this session. I want to give a huge thank you to our panelists. I think they've shared such interesting insights into their careers and their thoughts. I think been really, really insightful and helpful on what it is to go into a research and innovation career. And I hope you in the audience feel inspired by our panelists. I have been asked to remind you to fill in the survey, okay? So you're not off scot-free yet. Please do fill in your survey, which will apparently be added to the chat and included in a follow-up email. And the next What It Takes event is on Thursday, the 25th of November, and it is what it takes to overcome imposter syndrome. Here's something I think we can all learn from there, certainly me. You can book that online now. So finally, I wish you a very good evening. Thank you so much for joining us. And a huge thank you to Penny, Natalia, and Lem, our fantastic panelists. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.